Hi, I'm Gary Ward, and you saw me on TV, and since that moment my email inbox has had a deluge of emails, and my phone hasn't stopped ringing, and my colleague has been in the same boat, and we do not know how to handle the demand, but we do want to help. So I read the emails and I get a real sense of desperation, and I also thankfully get a real idea that the show has given you guys some hope. And we know that the way that we work and the way that we move the human body and the way that we inspire things to change can really help you. And so we're hoping that we can get that across in a video format for you, just to get the ball rolling. In fact, encouraging you guys to do the movements that we're going to work through today on this video, working through it over Christmas, working through it into the new year, was going to give you a really good chance to liberate your body somewhat and understand your body in a way that you can just begin to move more easily, maybe understand the restrictions in your body, the limitations that are currently holding you back. And then when you finally get to meet with an AIM practitioner, that is somebody who is using our thought process and our philosophy of work, then you're already going to be in a much better space to work with them than you currently are now. Part of this process is to leave the I need to be fixed place, that's what I'm reading in the emails, is you are coming to me to be fixed. But the truth is that I don't do that. Too many therapists think they're fixers, and too many patients need to be fixed, instead of the patient recognizing that the fixing or the healing takes place in themselves, and that we are just mere guides and facilitators to show you the dark areas in your body that you did not know that you didn't know that you couldn't move. So our goal is for you to experience that today. Our goal is for you to intelligently work through the body in a systematic format whereby you can understand the differences between your left and your right, your difference between one movement and the same movement in the opposite direction, so that you ultimately find your imbalances, and then we'll gradually sequence it all together for you to work through, experience, but ultimately feed movement back into this body of yours. And then we sit back and observe and see what happens. What do I mean by sit back and observe? What we notice is that when we move people, their body reacts in such a way that it actually changes. You have all seen Ray's spine on Doctor in the House straighten up, but there were bits that you didn't see. We didn't see the journey that spine went through to end up straight. So in observation is we interact, we sit back and observe, we interact, we sit back and observe, just to observe how the body likes to move and how it wants to change through the process. So flipping that back onto you is things will change, things will feel different, you'll become aware of things you didn't know that you weren't aware of, and by moving into those spaces, opening up spaces that used to be closed, closing spaces that used to be open, I'm talking joint structure, you'll notice differences and changes in your body will move around inside its cage until it finds center. And center is this kind of holy grail of a place that we look for that is well known worldwide as balance. And interacting with balance is a way of giving more blood flow to areas, getting more oxygen to areas, giving more flow and room inside your organ capacity, giving mobility to the nerves, the muscles, and ultimately the joints as well, which in our opinion are kind of the king of the system. What this video is what we do in clinic. The movements are never any more or less than what we're going to do in this video, so you're not really missing out. The only thing that you don't have is a practitioner on hand being super specific, but sometimes not being super specific and moving through your own process is 1,000 times more beneficial and rewarding. Also, we have no expectation of this being your complete fix. We're not expecting miracles, we're expecting you to undergo and be willing to take on a journey that might take some time. But some interaction with these movements on a daily basis is inevitably going to stimulate change through the challenge that you put through your own system. When we do this on our courses, we have courses that are 6 days long for therapists, and believe it or not, therapists are just as problematic as you guys when it comes to their pain and their problems. These 6 days we move like this every single day, and they unwind and they unwind and they unwind, and right at the end we assess, and we may find the one thing that's really holding them back. When that's treated, they have a kind of huge eureka moment. So in the long term, we're preparing ourselves through this step-by-step process of moving every day for the day that you finally meet with a therapist who uses the AIM method. And we're building a database for that so that you can find these people. Thank you very much, and we'll be working through the movements from here on in. The first part of the moving process is basically a self-assessment. So we're going to move our main key structures, pelvis, ribcage and skull, in 3 dimensions with the intention of capturing what I do differently on one side to the other. And that is really what I want you to take notice of, is how am I achieving a movement in one direction compared to the other. First thing I want you to do is to just stand as I am. Take a deep breath. You're going to start becoming conscious of your body and how it's moving, and in fact how you're standing. So the primary objective here is to feel the weight in our feet. So if you just take your mind into your right foot and just check where the pressures are. Are the pressures on the outside of the right foot? The inside of the right foot, towards the front of the foot, or towards the back? Once you've got an idea of that, let's think of the left foot. And again, are the pressures on the outside of the foot, the inside of the foot, towards the forefoot, or to the back of the foot? The bigger picture, have a look at both feet. Do you feel the pressures equal in both feet? Or do you feel you carry the weight more in the left foot versus the right foot? Or more in the right foot versus the left foot? Do you feel the weight is more forwards in the forefeet? Or do you feel the weight is back in your heels? Maybe one of the quadrants, left forefoot, left heel, right forefoot, right heel, is more dominant than the others. Just make a note of that, because we'd like to see if that changes. Moving up into the pelvis, can you tip your pelvis forwards without pain? And can you tuck it under? I'll show you from the side. Can you tip your pelvis forwards, or can you tuck it under? And do they move smoothly and freely towards each other? Maybe you feel like you can access one but not the other. Make a note of that. Maybe one causes pain, or is just difficult to access. We're going to just bend one knee. What you should feel as you bend the left knee is that the right pelvis comes up high, like so. Do you find that easy to do compared to this side? Can you move freely from one to the other? Does one cause pain? And ask yourself, how are you achieving one compared to the other, if one is easier than the other? We also have a side-to-side movement of our pelvis. Just send the pelvis out as far as you can to the left, and we'll send it out as far as we can to the right. You might notice that one way is easy. You might notice that one way is challenging. How are you achieving the challenging one compared to the easy one? We can also rotate our pelvis. Place your hands on your rib cage. Rotate the pelvis left and rotate the pelvis right. Same questions. Can you achieve one, not the other? Does one go easier than the other? Does one cause pain or discomfort? Let's find out the things that we cannot do with our pelvis. Make a note of those things. You might find that you struggle to side shift the pelvis to the right. You might find that you struggle to hike the pelvis on the left. You might struggle to both anterior, posterior tilt and rotate one way. None of these are wrong, none of these are right. They're just how you are currently set up. Hopefully we'll be able to move through these as we go through the process. Onto the rib cage. Same process. So we're just going to see if we can tilt our rib cage forwards and tilt our rib cage backwards. Try to avoid leaning forward and leaning backwards, but actually lifting and falling, tipping forwards and backwards whilst maintaining a posture over the pelvis. Make notes. Is one easier? Is one harder? Does one cause pain? Is one free? Can you move through both but dominantly towards one? Most people are stuck here in flexion. See if we can experience the opposite. Still, hands on the rib cage. And we're going to what's known as a side bend. Side blend the rib cage again so it stays above the pelvis rather than leaning over to the side. So can you side bend your rib cage, almost staying inside two glass walls? Here's one easier than the other. Think of it as opening this side and closing this side. And as I go to the left, I'm opening on the right and closing on the left. Can I achieve this without shifting the pelvis? Because that's a different movement entirely. If you find that that's how you are achieving it, write it down. Finally, we can rotate the rib cage. Rotate it to the right. Rotate it to the left. Does one move more freely? Is one harder or painful? And make a note. Up into the skull, again. Think of moving on the axis of the ears. So I am just tucking the chin and elevating the chin. Looking down, looking up. Again, avoid looking at your toes or up at the ceiling. Just try and keep the head over the rib cage. Look down and up. Create space here or create space at the back. Looking straight on, can we side flex the skull? Left and right. Can we keep this a clean movement? Avoid any twists in the skull, but just a straight left, right bend. Which one is freer? Which one is harder? Does one cause pain? Do you flow easily from one to the other? And finally, the rotation. Looking left, looking right, Which is easier? Which is harder? Does one cause pain? Can you flow easily from one to the other? So when we make a note, as we make a note of all of that, I would like you to just get clear on the ones that you found challenging or painful, and we'll put those in the category of what we cannot do or struggle to do. So now we're going to look at how those structures that we've just interviewed, I guess, we're going to look at how those structures move together. And we have a way of thinking about this, and it's to consider it as cogs, like the working cogs of a clock. And what we'd like to see is that the pelvis, the rib cage and the skull move in such a way as when one moves in one direction, it encourages the other to move oppositely. And opposition is kind of the key thing here. We find a lot of people struggle to move these big structures oppositely, which means that their muscles are really not being asked to do anything, and the joints are being asked to do a lot. So all movement, all the way through all of our activities, we should be experiencing these oppositions. So if we can reintroduce those back into the system, then we're moving nicely forwards. What we'll do is we'll see if this movement of opposition is in place, and if it is or it isn't, we're going to encourage it anyway, as long as it's not exacerbating or causing you any further problems. If it does cause a problem, then we can just try the opposite to see if that feels pain-free, explore that for a while, and then try to bring the two back together and just see what changes. If doing it in one dimension, i.e. this is a problem, but the others are freer, then we'll stick in those, occasionally checking back to see if we've eventually freed up enough movement in the other dimensions. So we'll start with the tilting of the pelvis, which we'll look at from this direction. As you tilt the pelvis forward, do you feel your rib cage rise, or do you feel it follow? As you tuck the pelvis under, do you feel the rib cage fall, or do you feel it follow? Can you stay with the rib cage and the pelvis on top of each other versus moving forwards or backwards? Try to avoid tipping under and pushing the rib cage forward, for instance, but just allow the rib cage to fall onto the pelvis. We're entering that bad posture. Bad posture is not something we need to be concerned about. We're concerned about experiencing the range of opposites possible in our structure. Next, ask yourself, as we begin to encourage the rise of the rib cage with the tilt of the pelvis forwards, ask yourself, am I lifting the rib cage in a controlled way, or is it being lifted by the tilt in the pelvis? We don't need to be in control. We can just encourage these movements to follow and flow together. Up to the skull. If I keep my eyes on the horizon as I tilt my pelvis and the rib cage rises, the chin kind of tucks, closing the space at the front and closing the space at the back. I can exaggerate this a little bit, just allowing the chin to drop and allowing the chin to rise. This becomes a full exploration of the spine and the vertebral movements capable and available in your body. Believe it or not, in theory we would do this twice per stride in the gait cycle. Okay, back into this dimension. We're going to be bending the knee to lower the pelvis, and what you should experience is the opening of the tissues on the side of the pelvis that is lowering. And that should couple with this cog of the rib cage side bending to the right. As you do this, you should feel the weight still in the right foot, so that you know that you're carrying your mass on this right hand side. We'll compare to the other side. As I bend my right knee and the pelvis drops, do I feel the rib cage side bend to the left? And am I able to keep this rib cage on top of this pelvis, stacked and in line? How are you achieving it on the left compared to the right? Are you able to keep the weight in the right foot and switch to have the weight in the left foot? Are you able to keep inside these two glass frames